Hey everyone, I want to thank you for tuning in to one of EPARTRADE's Race Industry Now Tech webinars. If you're a part of the racing industry or you're just passionate about racing tech, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new episode. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well today. Welcome to another fantastic edition of Race Industry Now. My name is Brad Gillie, hosting today. Francis Savinian is joining us. Of course, he is across the Atlantic, but we want to wish him a very happy birthday today as well. Want to thank our sponsors also, Performance Plus Global Logistics, Ferrea Racing Components, ARP, Fifth Third Bank, Crower Cam, C-Tech Manufacturing, and Peak. And of course, we have Judy Keene and Andrea Break with us here today before we get into our webinar. Judy, I know we're getting closer and closer to what's going to be a very big week for the race industry here.
Exactly, Brad. And thank you everyone for joining today. Yes, we are starting to finalize our speakers, our guest speakers for the 6th annual Race Industry Week. Hard to believe. So if you still need to save your seat, please log on to the platform, sign in, just make sure you get that Zoom link when the time comes. Andrea.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, we're excited to have Stainless Diesel on today. I've known Johnny and his wife Amy from back when I was at PRI, and they're going to be talking turbos today, and I think it's going to be a really great technical webinar. So if people have questions, please send them in the chat, and Brad can throw those out there and get them answered. So look forward to it. Brad?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much, Judy. We'll talk to you all again here at the end of the webinar. And this is going to be a fun one for sure. I always look forward to anything that's going to help us improve, going to educate us, just going to make life in general better. Our topic today, turbo technology, using data and precision to push the limits of boost by Stainless Diesel. And it features Johnny Gilbert, the owner of Stainless Diesel. And Johnny, before we get started, I just want to reiterate what Andrea said. If you have a question at any time during this conversation, if you're watching us live now, please type it into the chat. This is literally your webinar. This is the opportunity for you to ask questions, for you to find out about the products, maybe learn something you didn't know, especially with an expert that we have here. So, Johnny, welcome. Hope you're doing well today.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, before we start getting into talking about diesel turbos and everything, let's talk a little bit about you and your background. It's not always just been in diesel. You spent a lot of time in the gas drag world as well, and have a wealth of knowledge that we can pass on here today.
Oh, for sure. I come from a gas drag racing background into the diesel industry about 20 years ago. And I've been privileged to be in the diesel industry for around 20 years here and watch it and be able to innovate and watch the horsepower goals go from, cracking 1,000 horsepower now to well over 3,000 in the racing diesel side of things, which we're catching up to our gas brothers.
Which is just simply incredible. Yeah, I always love the black smoke and all the other fun things that diesels bring. And to me, it always seems to be a highlight of any type of drag or any type of racing show, which is going to be fun. Well, give us a little overview, if you would, Johnny, just about some of the things we're going to be talking about, and we'll break it down in more detail as we go.
Sure. Yeah, just the way that turbo technology has changed over just the last 5 and 10 years, it's been tremendously just an awesome ride. Outstanding to see, bigger's not always better in the turbo side of things. It's especially more recently with the technology changing from cast wheels into billet forged compressor wheel technology and really advanced aero packages to make a smaller turbo, gain performance in that 10 to 20% range over the old cast wheel variants of yesteryear, essentially. And now, looking to the future, we've got electronically controlled turbos now on the newer platforms for the diesel industry. And I see a future where AI boost control management is going to be and has been utilized here to a point in racing. So very interesting.
I like that. This is the fun thing about technology and racing technology. You don't ever have it all figured out, and just when you think you've maximized what you have, something new comes along. And to your point, AI and really being able to manage things in real time and all of that is a fun thing. Well, let's get down to the nitty gritty, and let's talk about turbos itself and bearing clearances and how that affects performance.
Sure. Yeah, bearing clearances in an engine very critical, as everyone knows. So take that a step further into the turbocharger side. Turbocharger has the tightest bearing clearances in it in a whole platform, whether, comparing that to a engine bearing clearance. So you're talking, the thickness of a hair essentially is 2 thousandths to around 4 thousandths on average. So a journal bearing turbocharger that's been around for years. Typically, you're less than 1 thousandth of an inch, so 9/10,000ths of an inch from the shaft to the inside diameter of a journal bearing. On the outside diameter of the journal bearing to a bearing housing, we're typically in that 1.2 to 1.3 thousandths of an inch on the outside. So too loose, you lose oil control, which can cause some problems for sure. Too tight, from thermal expansion, bearings can touch down and seize. So there's a fine line to making that happen for longevity. And then the engine side comes into play as well. So good oil pressure, good filtration is a key to keeping that stuff alive.
Yeah, well, while we're talking about bearings and pressure and filtration and all of that, what can looking at the inside of your turbo tell you about the inside of your engine as well?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we've seen some over the years. We call it liquid sandpaper essentially. So as an engine's coming apart and as an oil filter internal bypasses, sometimes depending on the filter design and the engine platform, there's always an internal oil bypass, and not everything gets caught by the filter, surprisingly enough. But when liquid sandpaper somewhat goes through the turbo in the bearing system, just a grain of sand will leave a kind of that record player groove through the bearing. So we can see, as servicing a turbocharger, you can see that there's some particulate matter going through the bearing system. And 9 times out of 10, we can warn an engine owner of that particular engine when he sends the turbo in for an upgrade or a freshen up, that there might be something they need to look at further.
Yeah, that's it's again, all of the different things and indicators, and when you're making big power, there's a lot that goes along with it. Well, let's talk about turbo shaft speed and how you monitor that and why that is important.
No, for sure. And shaft speed's relevant to kind of different size of turbochargers too. And then in the diesel world, it's kind of funny. Like we typically don't run boost controllers, or say like the gas world would have a boost controller to keep the engine from melting down. And in diesel, a lot of guys don't run boost controllers to ramp boost in and ramp boost up like a gas guy would for traction control and things of that nature. We use it for pressure ratio and shaft speed mitigation to help control that. So with the sensors, there's 2 different locations typically on a turbo that you would utilize a sensor. One would be right in the middle of the shaft, and there's a little flat grind mark or machined portion of the shaft that would be flat adjacent to the round portion of the shaft, and then a sensor would go right in line with that, and it counts 1 revolution, and then that'll give you an indication of shaft speed there on that design. A number of, I'd say probably it's more prevalent to see a turbo cover, compressor cover, have a sensor in it in which you're counting blade counts. And then that's important as well because there's multiple different kind of blades counts that are prevalent. Our version of the technology would be like our 5-blade compressor wheel, which is actually 10 blades when you count the splitter, where some of the OEM would be more like a 7-blade or an 8-blade with the splitter. So we count them multiple different ways.
Yeah, interesting. We do have a question already that's coming from the chat, and please keep them coming because we definitely want to talk about what you want to know about. Richard Vincent wants to know: are the clearances in the thrust bearing the same as the clearances in the journal bearings?
Oh, great question. Great question. So there's a thrust bearing design has evolved over the years to a number of different ways to make a thrust bearing. One that we really like, there's a 270 thrust bearing, there's a 360 thrust bearing, in which the thrust bearing is encapsulated on the thrust collar 360 degrees around the bearing. There's some that are more open, say 270 degrees. The clearance does come into play. It's around 1,000ths to 3,000ths on in play, depending on the turbo size. The smaller turbos will run a little tighter clearance. The larger frame turbos, maybe a little bit more. So in play typically is in that 3,000ths range of, in general, give or take a little more. And that's on a brand new unit when you're doing your stack up and you're measuring that in play. So typically the difference in bearing design too, there's a wedge style bearing. So where the oil enters, it might be a thousandth right there or 1.2, but where the thrust pad squeezes the oil down to maybe 6.5, 0.6 tenths. So it has a pinch point or a pressure point on a number of pads. Some are 5 pads, some are 3 pads, some are 10 pads, depending on the bearing design. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that is for sure. And while we're talking about diesel turbos, if you could expand a little bit, because I know we have an audience who has a wide range of things that they're looking at when it comes to putting more power in their diesel. There are some with racing applications, there are some with towing applications, and then there are some we just want to have, a pretty hot truck on the street or something like that. So what
Sure.
types of differences are we looking at when we're talking about turbos and what we want it to do, what we're asking that engine to do?
Sure. One of the biggest things, differences, say, with a diesel in particular and a turbocharger versus, say, our gas brothers here. Let's just do an example. The VE, the volumetric efficiency of a diesel engine, is not quite as good as it is, say, in a Chevrolet V8, big block Chevy, that's highly refined cylinder heads and camshaft. And in the diesel world, we do have some really nice cylinder heads and camshaft technology. But typically the VE is a bit lower in a diesel. So for example, let's take an 80 millimeter turbocharger. Something's capable of that 12 to 1300 horsepower range, horsepower. In a gas world, because the volumetric efficiency is so much better, they have more RPM to play with. Typically that 7,000-8,000 RPM range, where even in our billet Cummins engines, we're still in that 6,000 to 7,000 range and down typically. So operationally, and then pressure ratios on the gas to get that 1300 horsepower might be 22 to 25 PSI. So to get that same 12 to 1300 on the diesel application, we'd probably be in that 65 pound range, maybe 70, depending on how good the cylinder head is. So quite a bit of difference between the two platforms as far as the turbocharger pressure ratios that you'll see at the same relative horsepower.
All right. Well, then while we're talking about this, let's talk about having the correct style boost gauge as well.
Oh,
And really the need to have a boost gauge.
Oh yeah. Boy, that's something nowadays. It's you'd be surprised how many people don't run a boost gauge, especially in the diesel world. But it's one of those things where data is key for longevity. Boost leaks, things that keep things alive. It's very important. So boost gauge is very important. And then like your normal gauges are PSI A or PSI G. So PSI G typically takes into consideration the barometric pressure. So it's really 14.7 PSI that we're sitting here under the atmospheric pressure pushing on our shoulders at sea level. So the gauges that say 0 is taking that into accountability. So when it's 0, it's actually calculated PSI gauge. So PSI actual, like in our data loggers for Motec ECMs or any of the high-end racing stuff, has to be set up for that. So gauges are key for sure.
Yeah. And again, when we start talking about, look, we want to go out there, we want to make big power, we want to make the right power and all of that, but just to be able to have a monitoring system. And I know it sounds so simple, but to your point, a lot of people don't necessarily run gauges, and the amazing amount of things that you can learn from it, or it can tell you about the health of what's happening, it makes it truly essential, right?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Different turbocharger sizes, you can make, I guess that's another kind of it's a misnomer, I guess, do you really need a bigger turbocharger all the time? Well, the technology's come so far that you can take a relatively small turbo, get that drivability, that boost response time, that transient boost response, and a smaller turbo and achieve the same horsepower as the years go on here. So the last 3 to 5 years, it's been just tremendous amount of power we're able to make out of a smaller turbocharger and get that drivability, that responsiveness that everybody wants.
Yeah, well, you know what? While we're on that subject, and then you brought up some of the other technology things coming up, how has turbo technology advanced over the years?
Yeah, it's just it's wild to see the electronics advance as far as the turbo technology on DGTs. And years ago, even just 5 years ago, it was pretty common to put a fixed geometry turbo together for, let's say, an 800 horsepower, 800 horsepower drivable kind of a combination with single turbo. And now we're able to get that number with a relatively small VGT and have great towability, drivability with engine braking. So the technology is moving really fast when it comes to the variable geometry turbo stuff. And I think the future's bright on that for sure. That's the direction.
Yeah, I like that for sure. All right, well, let's talk about you talk about pressure and all of that. What changes are made to allow high horsepower diesel turbos to live at high pressures and heat?
So yeah, some of the biggest deals is again, we kind of touched on oil pressure and the volume of oil. So journal bearing, for instance, let's go for a mid-frame kind of turbocharger, something that would be say 85 millimeters and down to say 68 millimeters, something in that range where really good performance, a wide spectrum of power capability. Say it's a journal bearing. So journal bearings at a high shaft speed rate, say 135,000 ish, is about the time that we see the bearings start to lose integrity, where the shaft and or bearing can no longer stay separated from the layer of oil it's riding on, and things will touch down. And then when that happens, bearings can expand and seize, and that happens at high shaft speed. So how we mitigate that is going to larger volume lines. So typically -4 is pretty common in the gas world, -3 or 4. And in the diesel world, that's fine up to a certain shaft speed, say 80 to 100,000 RPMs. Once we get above that, we like a -6 line. And typically, fluid dynamics here, twice the diameter is 4 times the volume in fluid dynamics. So when you're looking at some of that stuff, we also address pressure. So pressure is volume as well. So we like to, in a racing application, we'll go 80 pounds to maybe 120 pounds at a really high shaft speed of oil pressure when you're talking about that. And where factory trucks are kind of relatively limited with the factory pressure regulation in that 65, 64 pounds of oil pressure. So that larger line really comes into play to get that volume up if these guys are running the turbos to their utmost upper end of capability.
Yeah, and I like that you talk about all the other things because again, there are a lot of applications, and I'm sure most of us have been guilty of it at some point where you say, "Well, I'm just going to add this turbo," but everything else that you do need to add with it to make it work properly and actually get the most out of it. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into just saying, "This is the turbo I'm looking for," right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a full package. Just like anything else, if you're going to build a motor, you want to make sure everything's matched well. Camshaft, cylinder heads, and if you're adding turbochargers to the mix, typically you're not really needing an oil cooler, but I mean, depending on the application, like if you're a Baja truck and you want to be out full speed, or say Bonneville salt flat stuff running wide open for 5 miles, that might come into play for sure.
Mhm. Another question from the chat. And again, if you have anything that you want to know about for Johnny, please just type it in and we'd love to talk about everything you want to. Mike wants to know, are gas and diesel turbos the same or are they very different?
Man, that's a great question. We definitely get that a lot. We've got a really, really good friend of mine, Brian Goldstone. He's a drag and drive guy, won multiple 6 weeks and multiple drag and drive events. He gets that question quite a bit with our turbochargers on some of his hot rods. So I look at it like this. We would size the turbo slightly different for gas versus diesel. And what I mean by that is compressor wheel versus turbine wheel. And we want more turbine wheel leverage, essentially be a larger turbine wheel versus compressor wheel in the diesel world, because we run at such high partial pressures. In the gas world, where you're running a little bit lower pressures, you can get away with that turbine wheel match. So like it's pretty common in the gas world maybe to hear about a 75, 76 sizing. And what that means is when you're looking at the turbo where the air filter goes, that might be a 75 millimeter wheel there. You flip it around to the exhaust side, that might be a 76 millimeter wheel there. In the diesel world, we like to be a little higher ratio. So we might be like a 75, 87, for instance. So we'll jump up to get turbine leverage because we're not running in that 20, 25 pound pressure range. We're 50 to 70 pounds in that same thing. So it gives us a little more efficiency, and we're pushing against dry pressure and things like that. So it's a balance, but typically the turbo is exactly the same that we would put on a gas application. Turbo's an air pump and the engine's an air pump. So I typically just look at the application, what it's going to be on, the power range, and then we just build from there.
So outside of that, is everything else pretty similar as well as far as wastegate and different things like that?
Yep. So we would use Typically on the diesel stuff, we would do the same with wastegates. You know, we work back and forth with TurboSmart quite a bit on some different technology there on the wastegate side, where the cars would be well known to have a blow-off valve. So that the blow-off valve is on the cold side of the intercooler side typically. And because you have a butterfly on an intake for a gas car, the diesels typically don't have a butterfly. We're direct injected with diesel right into the cylinder. So that's the way we, you know, get fuel and take fuel away and do all that good stuff. So we don't have a butterfly in the intake system. So typically on a diesel, they don't do blow-off valves very often at all, if any. But sometimes they do. In the gas world, the blow-off valve helps to keep that turbo surge, you know, and bending of the throttle plate essentially out of the equation. So that's probably one of the biggest difference in the way that we would do it in diesel versus gas. And as far as the wastegates go, in diesel, we've in my pro mod, so I had a 63 split window pro mod. We used to race for about 3 years, and we've been some 4.0s and 660 feet, 8th mile, at just under 190 or so in the diesel world. So it's a billet Cummins engine, 2,750 pounds or so. We ran into trouble with our big 98 millimeter unit. You'll hear 98s being used in the gas world quite often. We would run nitrous oxide, and to keep the shaft speed and pressures under control, 2 wastegates are definitely utilized to their maximum capabilities to keep pressure down. We've identified in the gas world, that same style turbo might make 44 to 50 pounds on the high end, really high horsepower street outlaw type of a big block Chevy or Hemi. In our diesel world applications, we're in that 105 to 110 pounds of boost range. If we go much over that, the weak point is the compressor wheel actually bends from the pressure ratio. So that's the part that to help keep it alive in the diesel world, we need to keep pressure ratios under control. We're at the limitation of a forged aluminum compressor material in our geometries that we like to use.
That sounds incredible and a whole lot of fun. And putting that together,
Yeah,
by the way.
it's a great time.
Yeah, I like that. All right, a couple more questions. Let's see. When talking about boost and shaft speed, what are some of the highest recorded boost PSI numbers and shaft speeds you've seen, and how does that compare to what's seen in the gas world?
Oh, for sure. In the diesel world, we're basically do compounds when we get really much over 100 PSI as a single. So 100 PSI as a single is kind of that 105, 110. It's kind of that hard limit for longevity to keep things happy long term. So after that, we compound the turbo. So if you think about it, like, I guess in the gas world, you would call it sequential turbo. So we're feeding a large turbo into another smaller turbo, typically. The small one's for drivability, spool up. And then the second one comes on mid-range boost, high end to get that mid-range top end power. But what that does, it's like a 2-stage air compressor, the best way to describe it. So you have 2 stages of compression. You have the primary air taken in the air filter air, and that's shoving it back into another turbo's compressor, getting recompressed, and then into the intercooler system. And under those applications, sometimes we'll have 3 turbos. 2 would be the atmospheric turbos taken in the atmospheric air and pressurizing it into a single stage, a recompression stage going into the intercooler system, something like that. And that we've documented some 180, 185 pounds of boost range. But during that testing, and a lot of that was on track, basically, and real world testing, you know, dynamic testing versus static dyno testing. What we found was we would go to a little bit bigger exhaust housing, change the compressor wheel ratio sizes, and to get the compressed air temperatures down. So we started running closer to that 130 to 140 pound range, gathering data over the years and seeing what really worked better for keeping temperatures down, keeping turbos alive. But yeah, 180 pounds, that's probably the top side that we've seen.
I like this. I like the whole idea of let's go really big and then we'll back it down to get to where we need. Again, it sounds like you guys have a lot of fun. All right, here's another question for you, Johnny. It says, could you expand on turbine leverage and how does that work?
So basically, the way that I like to think about it is your compressor wheel, as you gain pressure, you know, if you're at 5 to 10 pounds of pressure, let's just say a lower pressure ratio, you don't need as much driving the turbine to make that compressor easily make that kind of pressure ratio. So you'll run into what's called the surge line. So when you're looking at a typical map on a turbocharger map from any OE guys that put it out there aftermarket, the left side of the map is typically your surge line. So what we try to do in the diesel world, because our volumetric efficiency is quite a bit lower than our gas brothers, is we tend to run closer to the surge line in some applications in certain lower to mid-level boost ranges. So we need a little bit more turbine wheel to aid with leverage in high pressure. So where the gas guys, you'll have typically no problems with that 20 to 25 pound range, where we need, 50, 60 pounds. And sometimes the turbine wheel ratio to the compressor wheel size is very, very helpful in that. And when you get the size too small in a diesel, for instance, let's say we put a 75, 76 on a diesel with a certain VE, say an inline 6 Cummins variant would be more it's got less VE than say a Duramax engine that's a V8 with some better flowing cylinder heads and of course 2 more cylinders, say same cubic inch or roughly. What we would see is the Cummins variant with that smaller turbine wheel would run into the surge line or start surging first. So we would just put a bigger turbine wheel on it. And then what that does is it changes the leverage point of that pressure ratio, and it aids in packing and keeping the pressure up easily with less surge. That's the best way that we found to make it work.
That's pretty interesting. Well, well, and while we're talking about this, how do you pick the right size for your setup? Again, there are people trying to accomplish different things here, from towing to street to racing and all of that. How do
Sure.
you pick the right size?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And then every engine platform is quite a bit different. So you could have it, the same turbo on a 2-liter or a 3-liter diesel or gas motor. So you want to make 600 horsepower, but you could take essentially that same compressor wheel side, put it on a 400 cubic inch, either LS motor or say a Cummins diesel, for instance, and still make that same 500-600 horsepower. The difference would be between all of those applications. The compressor wheel side might be the same, the cold side, but we would change the exhaust wheel and the turbine housing to make it work on the different applications. The best way I could explain that, the turbine housing, think of it, the exhaust housing, think of it like the transmission of the turbo. It kind of tells you what gear you're putting this thing in. So the smaller housings, say it's like you're taking off in first gear. Bigger housings, it might be like you're taking off in second gear or third gear. So we kind of size things appropriately to the engine size and on the exhaust side, and it still might have the same compressor wheel size to get in that normal horsepower range you're shooting for. But because the engine sizes vary greatly, we tweak the transmission of the turbo, essentially the exhaust housing and wheel combination for a well-matched combination.
I like that. That's a good way to describe it and put it into perspective. With any sort of power adder or anything like that, then what kind of electronic technology are we talking about as far as tunes and different things go?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different companies out there that make tuning mediums. As far as like the gas guys, they run Motec for years. Us diesel guys just started doing it probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, with the Motec stuff. Holley, of course, really big in the gas world, not quite in the diesel world yet, but there's some Bosch Motorsports had an ECM out before that we ran for years that was made for Audi Le Mans racing, so through Bosch Motorsports. And then as far as like the standalone piggyback stuff, there's a lot of different tuner companies out there. You can do a plug and play to gain 50 or 100 horsepower and get some better towability, better mileage on various applications. So there's that technology is definitely getting better and better every year.
It's really cool. If you have a question for Johnny, again, please feel free to type it into the chat. We've had some great ones already, and we'd love to, again, help educate you or answer any questions that you might have. When it comes to all of this, with everything that you guys are doing at Stainless Diesel, y'all are also a great resource if someone needs help, if someone's looking at some of your products and everything, to just be able to call and kind of lay it out there for here's what I've got, here's what I want. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we got a great staff here. And for any questions or anything else, you can email sales@stainlessdiesel.com or get a hold of any of the guys here in the shop, and they will point you in the right direction for sure. There's so many applications, and then as we know, the internet is full of tons of information. And I always tell people to make sure you take advice for somebody that it kind of depends on their wallet, let's just say, for their longevity. You just want to make sure you get advice from the right person. So it's so many varied ways. There's I guess, many different ways to skin a cat. So you can make the same horsepower in many cases with different combinations. But say somebody never wants to tow a 40-foot gooseneck trailer, but he wants 800 horsepower. There's ways to get there. Say that there's a guy that pulls a 45-foot camper trailer and basically is in the mountains of West Virginia quite a bit. Single turbo, you can get away with the same horsepower. The drivability is another story depending on the application. So compound turbos are really prevalent for guys that want to tow heavy in different parts of the country and elevation. So if you're 6,000 or 7,000 feet, 800 horsepower single turbo, not so fun to drive drivability wise as a single. So compound turbos, really you get your cake and eat it too when it comes to drivability with that, and still able to achieve that horsepower and drivability and towability. So a lot of the stuff we do in the racing world, we've gathered a cluster of data that shows this is better for longevity, this is better for horsepower, and we take that technology and put it into our daily driver bolt-on stock appearing stuff and different kind of setups. So, and all the guys are really well versed. They're enthusiasts here at the shop, and we all go to the racetracks, and we're horsepower crazy around here.
Which we love, and this is great. This literally transitions into the most recent question that came in. When racing at Bandimere Speedway, Thunder Mountain, high altitude, are adjustments needed to the turbo?
So typically what we worry about at elevation, air is thinner. So the shaft speed's typically going to be a little bit higher. And you may or may not make the same pressure there depending on the engine platform and cylinder head, the VE, the camshaft, that you would say at 1,000 foot. If you're at 6,000 or 8,000 feet, typically you're going to make a little less pressure. You're going to have a little less air going in, but the shaft speed's going to be higher. So there's nothing really you can do other than make sure you don't have any boost leaks. That's one of the biggest things I could tell everybody before you go to the track or before you go racing, or if you're going to change the oil on the weekend and get in the garage, get in the shop and just do a service, pressurize the whole turbocharger from where the air filter goes in. We sell a couple boost leak checker systems. There's a lot of different people out there that have them available, but we pressurize the entire system, which would consist of the turbocharger, the intercooler pipe, the intercooler, all the way to the intake. And you don't have to loosen the valves up to make it, build pressure or anything like that. Sometimes you got to bump the engine over to make sure maybe an intake valve's a little more shut than other times. But for the most part, boost leaks cause the shaft speed to go quite a bit higher in some cases, especially at altitude. So you lose horsepower, your EGTs get high, shaft speed gets high. And if shaft speed gets too high, that's when turbos go south really fast. So elevation compounds is definitely a better choice in some cases. And then if it's a variable geometry turbo, calibration on the vane tables, like how open do you want to make that vane table to slow the shaft speed down? So that's the next level technology with the VGTs are just amazing what you can do with them.
You know what? And I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about overspeeding turbos and what we need to know.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so typically on a journal bearing versus our, the latest ball bearing stuff that we do, we see a definitive line at a certain speed, at a certain oil pressure with a certain size oil line on it that you hit a hard limit, you hit a wall. And typically, say a mid-frame thing, again, kind of that 68 millimeter thing, maybe up to 85 millimeter range of mid-frame that's really common on the street and in racing, sled pulling, even on the LS engine, things like that too. Shaft speed becomes an issue when the oil volume can no longer separate the bearing from the shaft at speed. And that's the point where a bearing would touch. And as soon as a bearing touches, what we find is that it swells up, it gets hot. Then it swells up and seizes. And as soon as it seizes, The shaft's still spinning, but it has no oil going to the location. So it'll wear down the bearing real quick, and wheels start touching housings and making awful noises. And it's a shame when that happens. So wastegates, once we see that come in, we're saying, hey, a lot of guys don't run shaft speed data, but they'll have boost data. Boost is not the best indicator of shaft speed, but it gives us an idea based on the combination and years of data that we've accumulated as to where they're at. So we try to point them in the right direction. Up, like in a Cummins, we'll shim the oil pressure regulator up to about 85 pounds, 90 pounds. It's a pretty easy process to do on a Cummins platform. The larger oil lines to help mitigate that bearing touching down at super high shaft speed. But we've seen tractor pulling applications, 144,000, but 120 pounds of oil pressure with a journal bearing. So that's probably the extreme that we've seen. And then even then, it's only living 4 or 5 passes before it needs a service. And then as far as like, the normal shaft speed, journal bearing stuff, we try to put a hard limit on it at 135. And that's if you had -6 oil feed line, and if you had, say 80 pounds of oil pressure. And we see that being a really good combination for longevity. There and down is a safe range.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned a couple things like monitoring it and other things, but I mean, really, are there any sort of protections that you can put in there to help prevent you from hurting yourself, I guess, if you will?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, wastegates, basically having the wastegates and properly controlled wastegates to keep shaft speed in the lower ranges. Like typically the car guys don't tear up the same things that the diesel guys will tear up. If you run too high a boost on a diesel, typically it doesn't hurt the head gasket, it doesn't drop the rods, you don't burn a piston, you just hurt a turbocharger, which is bad for the turbocharger guys and the customer as well. So we try to point them in the right direction there. In the gas world, if they run too high a boost and lean out the car, you're going to burn a spark plug strap off, hurt a piston, maybe blow a head gasket if it's an LS. Some of those things don't like much over 30 pounds for very long, or 40 pounds with some hoops, some fire rings to help clamp the head on those things. But yeah, as far as overspeed, wastegates are the key to keeping it alive and matching the exhaust housing to the application. That's huge.
Johnny, I know you talked about a few things earlier as far as where technology is going, and maybe even some AI and different things like that. But what more can you tell us about where turbo technology is heading?
Well, I really like the ball bearing options nowadays. It's like some of the pricings, the availability of technology for the ball bearing is becoming more prevalent, and they've been around for a while for sure. But the price is up there. So we're trying to get more racers into it with a safer price point, and also ball bearings will take a higher shaft speed with lower oil volume required. So that's a big thing. The ball bearings typically can run much higher shaft speeds than journal bearings, and they'll take like a boost spike. Say you broke a drivetrain component in a sled pull tractor or a truck, for instance. They break a drive shaft and the engine spikes RPM. That spikes the turbo shaft speed as well. So that can hurt a journal bearing much easier than a ball bearing turbocharger. So higher shaft speeds, you can get away with ball bearings. So the technology with the ball bearings are just crazy. We've been doing ball bearing stuff for just over 10 years. And every year we refine things, we change stuff, we learn from all the data acquisition that we get. And typically in the ball bearing world, we're using it's a silicone nitride ball. So it's basically a ceramic ball. It has 10 times the compressive strength of a steel ball of the same size. So it's quite a bit, it's really good in compression strength. In tensile strength, it's not quite as good, but we're not really pulling it apart. We're pushing it together the way that the races are ran. It's a stainless steel race. It's usually a 300 series non-magnetic stainless that the balls ride in. And the interesting part about the ball manufacturers, they've got different grades of the ceramic balls that we use in the turbochargers. The grade 3 or grade 5 is our typical numbers that we use. And what that means I think it's called the ABAC scale. So it's 3 millionths from perfectly round or 5 millionths from perfectly round. I don't know how they measure that, but our suppliers, that's typically the sizes that we use.
That's nice. Is there any
Mhm.
drawback to it? Or maybe the better question is, like, it's real easy to hear what you just said and say, hey, I want to do this, but I want to make sure I have ball bearing, for it. But
Right.
always the
Right.
best or a better application, or would you say,
Sure.
well, you only need
Well,
it when you get up this high?
no, for sure, for sure. So any kind of performance and racing application or using a turbocharger to its utmost upper end capability, I think longevity wise, ball bearing is the way to go if you can fit it in the budget. Obviously, it's the downside is the budget side. The parts are more expensive to buy. The componentry, cost to entry is a little higher than a journal bearing. If you manage a journal bearing shaft speed and in the right ranges for daily drivers, I'd rather have a journal bearing. I think they're better for everyday driving, longevity, towing, long haul stuff. They handle the thermal heat exposure pretty good as far as that goes. On the downside for the as far as particulate matter getting in either one of those applications, filtration is still key for both for longevity. But I'd say ball bearing, we relegate that to more of a super high or performance side. More than the daily driver side. But if you had a hot daily driver side that's more of a weekend warrior, it would fit there too, as long as you're not pulling, maybe towing with it or camper trailer stuff. I'd rather go with journal bearing in that application.
Yeah, and again, when we talk about the different applications that people have, if you're towing or street, especially if you're towing, a lot of times you're likely going longer distances at constant speeds and things like that. If you're out there racing, that's a hammering down and, kind of one and done each time, right? I mean, that makes
Oh yeah.
what you
Oh
have.
yeah. Yeah, and some of the ball bearing stuff, like we've in the diesel world, we use a lot of nitrous. So in the gas world, they're just starting to kind of catch on to some of the give me some nitrous to spool this thing up, but you're not typically running turbo nitrous down track. Where as diesel guys, we are running nitrous down track. It's almost like nitrous was born for diesels and turbos. The trick when you're introducing nitrous into a turbocharger on a diesel is it picks up shaft speed quite a bit. So that's where that shaft speed mitigation is huge, having the right wastegate sizes and enough of the wastegates on the application to keep shaft speed down when you're spraying nitrous at it. The reason why, like in the diesel racing applications that we're doing, like a lot of the drag race stuff, will run nitrous is because that real quick to spool up. So that's one of those things where if you're going to the line, you want to spool up quick as you can to keep your transmission down and get in so your competitor's not waiting really long on the line. If you have a 7-second kind of timeout, usually before you line up, things of that nature. So we can run a really big turbo on a diesel and spool in about 2 seconds, relatively quickly with nitrous. But shaft speed goes higher with nitrous, so that really it's one of those things where we run higher exhaust temperatures too in the diesel world. So nitrous is kind of like a blowtorch effect on the turbine wheel. So we've seen some thermal erosion. We use an Inconel based turbine wheel mixture. It's a really high nickel content and it helps really good thermal rejection. So what we've done to further that technology side and to play with that farther, we've changed the blade geometries and counts and made them, on some of our higher end, bigger units, we went from a 10 blade to a 9 blade turbine wheel, and which that technology has trickled down to our daily driver VGTs. Knocking a blade out, we were able to keep the leverage on the compressor wheel, but we're able to have lower drive pressure on the exhaust side. So it has more free flow. It's a little bit lighter rotor group. So the compressor wheel and turbine together as a group is lighter. So transient boost response times are quicker. And then we've added an additional thing because of the nitrous and extreme uses that we do in the diesel world. We've done some thermal coating, some really high heat rejection thermal coatings on the turbine wheels, especially for guys that are using a ton of nitrous and have already experienced some thermal erosion of the turbine wheel due to super high heat. So there's a lot of new things we've learned in the last few years based on racing that trickled down to our daily driver street turbos and things of that nature, with turbine technology as well as compressor side technology.
I love it. I just want to be in the room when you guys are coming up with ideas of how much more can we stack onto this, and then how do we make it work efficiently.
Oh yeah.
It does sound like a lot of fun. Man, this has been awesome. What a wonderful education. And you can tell the wealth of knowledge and experience that you guys have and everything that's gone into it says a lot about what you guys do at Stainless Diesel.
Oh yeah, the guys here, and I guess it's our brain trust. We sit around and just think things up all day long and try them out on the track, and then it trickles down to the street guys. Just one of those things where the VGTs are the latest and greatest thing. I think the daily driver stuff. And we designed the turbochargers to be a little more aggressive on the turbine sounds or the resonance frequency ranges that you can hear, where some of the OEM guys, they'll design the turbochargers to be quiet and mitigate the whistle with their intake designs and their wheel designs. We try to make them a little more aggressive sounding, like a jet engine sound. We do have the quiet ones, but we do have some that sound pretty obnoxiously jet engine like, which we like and a lot of guys like.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. Johnny, thank you so much. This has been just wonderful, and look forward to doing this again sometime soon.
Thank you very much. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny. That was perfect. It was informative, exactly what our audience craves. So thank you for that. And I noticed you gave out your email address out there. We've also pushed your product to the front of the home page, so people are able to log on, reach out to you as well. So hopefully everybody wants to join us next week. We will be speaking to Dido Metals. So hope to see you then.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, we want to thank you for watching. Now, be sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell so you're always up to date with the latest racing technology, industry insights, and exclusive content from EPARTRADE.
EPARTRADE is a digital platform that we've created basically to make life easier in the business community of auto racing.
EPARTRADE, there is no e-commerce. It's literally a connection just like at a trade show. So now, any time of the year, a buyer could reach out to a supplier.
When you see a product that you're interested in, all you need to do is click on request more information, and then from there it is forwarded directly to the buyer or to the supplier.
EPARTRADE really eliminates having to travel, closing down your shop. Now you have a place to showcase globally your racing product and technology.
Land speed record holder George Poteet's Speed Demon rocketed 481 miles per hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats. You don't go that fast without ARP fasteners.
There is no way that we could go the speed that we've gone, the number of times we've gone, with a lesser quality bolt than ARP supplies to us. And we absolutely wouldn't be where we were today if it weren't for ARP.
When failure is not an option, it's ARP-bolts.com.
We're Performance Plus Global Logistics. Our team of dedicated performance industry and logistics experts get valuable cars and components to the track on time in top condition. We provide expedited logistics solutions for the performance industry using direct routes instead of deferred options, and communicate all necessary information to the appropriate resources to meet regulations and ensure a smooth transit and secure delivery, both domestically and internationally. And we exceed customer expectations by providing best-in-class service with an efficient and cost-effective system in place. Contact us today to book your next shipment.
You work as hard as your truck, and you have no time for downtime. That's why more truck owners trust Blue Def, America's #1 diesel exhaust fluid brand. Each batch is guaranteed pure, so you can avoid costly repairs caused by inferior DEF. Demand America's best for your truck. Blue Def and Blue Def Platinum. Put trust in your truck.
With roots in the Midwest that date back well before the Model T, Fifth Third Bank has a long history of serving the needs of automotive companies. While much has changed over the years, our passion for helping businesses put cars on the road and on the track has not. Today, we are more committed than ever as a member of SEMA, a founding member of PRI, and a sponsor of multiple race teams across several racing series. Where can we take your business? Fifth Third Bank.
Where will you find Farea racing components? Circle track, drag racing, and any top race shop. In every form of motorsports competition, our valves and valve train components deliver race-proven design and technology. And we've brought that same performance to our street applications as well. We're backed by 5 decades of experience, an extensive range of off-the-shelf components, and our custom valve department has the fastest turnaround times in the industry. Farea Racing Components. Stand with us or race against us.
When it comes to pushing the limits of performance, the pros know there's no room for compromise. At Crowder Cams, we don't just engineer camshafts and valve train components, we redefine what power means. Since 1955, Crowder Cams has been the name trusted by racers, engine builders, and gearheads around the globe. Whether you're building a street machine, a dragster, or a track car, Crowder Cams provides the muscle you need to dominate. And with Crowder, victory is within your reach.
At SeaTech, we're on a mission to lead the storage industry through innovative custom-built solutions that meet every challenge head-on. Designed for versatility, whether in a commercial setting or at home, we create high-quality, durable products that stand the test of time. SeaTech, engineering and innovation.